Okay, hi everyone, it's Anna and welcome to the Classy Career Girl Show. Today I have a special guest I'm really excited to introduce you to. I've known Emily Bennington for many years now. I interviewed you, I think over almost 5 years ago now, about your other book. You're a writer of all things professional development, careers, leadership. You guys, she's been writing books for about 10 years now. And her latest book is one I'm really excited to interview her about. It's a little different from the rest. And the book is called Miracles at Work, Turning Inner Guidance into Outer Influence. And I'm hoping to learn a lot from her today because the topic that we're talking about today is merging your spiritual and your professional selves. And it's something I want to learn more about myself because I know you guys all know me in this very public professional space, CEO of Classy Career Girl, but I also have a very deep spiritual side as well. And Emily says that when we make attempts to compartmentalize our spiritual selves and our business selves, it often leaves us lacking in both, which is why she believes that spiritual intelligence is the next frontier in success. And that is exactly what we're going to dive into and talk about today. So please join me in welcoming Emily to the show. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you so much, Anna. I'm so thrilled to be here.
Awesome. Us too. And congrats on your book launch and everything. And thanks for taking the time to join us here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So let's dive into our topic of spiritual intelligence. A lot of us know already, what emotional intelligence is. You've guest posted on Classy Career Girl before about mindfulness. So teach us about spiritual intelligence today.
Okay, so to teach you about spiritual intelligence, I have to back up to 1989 and share Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I'm sure you're familiar with that book.
Yeah, that's a life changer.
Oh, it's such an excellent book. It was really an absolute game changer in my career. But in that book, Stephen Covey talks about what he calls the emotional maturity continuum. And that is where we go from dependence in our career, where we're sort of dependent upon other people to meet our needs, to independence, where we're capable of meeting our own needs, to interdependence, where we collaborate with others for the healthy functioning of the whole. Now, that was a precursor to emotional intelligence, which we all know emotional intelligence is owning that space between stimulus and response, being composed around people that we work with, and just being able to control our feelings without popping off in the meeting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for a long time, that was sort of considered the apex of career development. Like if you're at the place where you are emotionally intelligent, then you got it, right? If you have IQ and you have EQ, then you've hit the top of the mountain. Well, I think there's a level beyond that, and it's called SQ, and it's spiritual intelligence. And what spiritual intelligence is saying, okay, it's not just enough for me to want to work well with you, to be composed around you. To be spiritually intelligent, I have to know that I am you. So what does that mean? That means that I'm capable of seeing through all of your personality differences, our personality differences, all of what I perceive to be your character flaws. And I am able to look through all of those things and see what we refer to in the spiritual world as the truth of who you are. So I'm capable of loving you, capital L love, through all of the things that on the surface that divide us. And what this translates to professionally is you have that composure. You're not trying to force it by trying to control or manipulate your emotions. It just comes naturally through you because it's the way that you're choosing to perceive the world. You're dropping all the judgments, you're dropping those perceptions, and you're stripping it down to the truth of who you are. And as you understand the truth of who you are, you start to see it in everyone else, and that brings that presence, that executive presence, that leadership presence that we're striving for at work.
Yeah, that's so important, especially we were just talking about this before we hit the record button. In my previous career, there were so many challenges. There was so much chaos. It was just extremely stressful. And I did not have any sort of executive presence. I didn't have any sort of calmness or peace or anything. And that's where I wish I would have, I had this book, right? I wish I would have had a little bit more of what we're going to talk about today. So
Mm-hmm.
what are some of those steps that you can teach then? And how did you discover this spiritual path? Because this isn't what your prior books were on, right?
Yeah, well, I discovered the spiritual path basically by doing what you were talking about before. It's just too much time bouncing off that chaos, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you spend enough time with a mind that I call like a shaken snow globe, and it starts to really affect your behavior, which in turn really starts to affect your relationships. So I was having performance reviews where my boss would say, Emily, I want to promote you. I think your work is really good. But the problem is you keep getting into these petty arguments with people on your team. And at one point, my very first performance review, my boss said, I really respect you, but I can't promote you because the team doesn't respect you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to realize that something about my behavior was turning away the team. And so the disconnect that I had at that point was that I was trying to force my behavior. And what I realized was, though, that if I wanted to change my behavior, I needed to sort of back it up to, I need to change my behavior. I need to change what I'm feeling. To change what I'm feeling, I need to change what I'm thinking. So if I can just get back to the source and sort of shift my perspective there, then the correct behaviors will just be the natural result. So I stopped reacting to the chaos by just having that perspective that I referred to earlier, and things just started to naturally unfold in my life in ways that were far less frustrating and anger inducing and maddening than they were before. All of that stuff was still going on around me, but I was just able to perceive it differently.
Did other people notice the change? Just totally curious.
1,000%.
Yeah.
1,000%. Like the first person was my husband. He was like, whoa, you handled that situation 1,000 times better than you would have before. What are you doing differently? And so for a long time, my spiritual practice was sort of the dirty little secret that I had. And I was calling it mindfulness because essentially it's just owning the space between stimulus and response. But from a strictly emotional intelligence perspective, what you're thinking and what you do comes from you, right? It comes from your prefrontal cortex and the amygdala that's going crazy, and you're trying to calm that down. And we have all these tips and tools for the mechanics of the brain. But from a spiritual perspective, you're calling upon a wisdom that's greater than you. And so I was calling upon that wisdom more and more. And as a result, my behaviors were becoming more and more wise. And so I came out of the spiritual closet, and hence this book.
So were you doing that like while you're at work, or was this like a morning before you went to work?
Well, I believe in an all-day practice, right? So the spiritual practice for me, and I guess maybe we can just sort of back it up to what Miracles at Work is, which is a book based on the principles of a spiritual text called A Course in Miracles that I have translated for a career. So I guess to talk about the practice, I'll talk about what a miracle is. And a miracle in A Course in Miracles is a shift in perspective from fear-based thinking, the fear-based thinking that causes all that chaos in our life, to love, capital L love, that I was referring to earlier, where we're able to see through the personality differences to the truth of who we are. And once you make that shift, you become a clearer channel for the expression of love, which is pulling down that higher wisdom so that you're able to behave in wise ways. And so what we need to do to behave with wisdom and compassion, i.e. love, is to clear out all that crazy thinking that we have in our mind. And so that is the spiritual practice. And that's not something that we do for 10 minutes on a meditation cushion every morning. That's something we do in every single moment of every day.
So what is a miracle, and how would you describe that at Miracles at Work?
So the miracle is both internal and external. So the miracle is a shift in perspective from fear to love. So you're just sort of dropping all the crazy thinking and getting to a place where you are able to have you're able to navigate the world with a deep reservoir of grace, right? Can you imagine what that would be like in the chaotic work environments that we have so frequently, all these toxic work environments, what it's like to show up with a perspective of grace that no matter what happens to you, you're going to perceive it with wisdom and compassion and love. Where are the role models for this, right? We're not taught this. And so our job is to show up at work, do what the course calls standing for the alternative. And as we heal our own perspective, then we're able to do that and to be models for others of how to do the same.
Because there's so much you can't control, when you walk into work. And what I love about what you're talking about is we can control ourselves. We can control what we're thinking. We can control how we interact with people, how we love other people, even like the people that we're working with, our coworkers. I know I had clients that were very difficult to work with, but like instead of getting mad, I remember there was one client and I always, even though she was like going back behind my back and she was telling my boss stuff and trying to get me fired, I always went to her and I was just still very nice, just little Anna, and I think she was just so surprised that I was just still happy. In a way, I was doing what you're talking about. I was loving her, even though she was like trying to get me fired, and it's kind of like I just thought of that as an example of, even though I had no control over her and what she was saying, it's still like I had control over myself and how I was reacting. So it didn't get me down, right?
Yeah. The concept of strength to love is, and I'll just apply it the way that Martin Luther King referred to it in the civil rights movement, is when people are sick their dogs on you, right? When people have water hoses in your face, how do you love them through that, right? That is the strength to love. And the way that you love them through that is you are capable of seeing the humanity, some would say the divinity in them through all of those behaviors that you find so annoying. And when you're capable of doing that, again, you have that sort of composed presence of grace that you're not even trying for all that much. It's just the natural result of your perspective.
So when you decided to write this book, can you talk about kind of like your journey? Because I know a lot of the readers and people who are watching and listening to this, they're going through a large transition, very similar to what you did, going from writing a secular book now into a spiritual book. Can you talk about that transition and how that came about and kind of your journey?
Yeah, so I never expected to write a spiritual book. I met you, as you mentioned, 5-6 years ago. Have always written secular career books about career advice. That's how we connected. And that's how I connected with a large majority of the audience that I have. And so to come out with a spiritual book is a bit of a risk. It's certainly a branding confusion at the very least. But I do think that the bottom line is, I don't think that my story is all that important, other than always listen to the little voice that tells you, you need to be doing this, you need to be doing this. Because we all have it, and sometimes we don't listen to it. Sometimes we say, like in my case, it would be, I don't want to alienate any audience that I have by talking about spirituality. I don't want to scare anyone away. I don't want to be perceived as woo-woo. So I'm not going to do this. But what I discovered was that this was the voice that wouldn't leave me alone. And so at some point I just had to listen to it. And I don't regret it. I think it's been an extraordinary gift to be able to do this work and to talk about these principles now. And so what I would just say to your audience is just listen to that voice when you hear it, and don't ignore it, because from my experience, it doesn't go away.
Oh, I think that's so smart. And I'm glad you listened to it. And I think we need a little bit more explanation then of, it sounds like the Course of Miracles was like that big that big change for you,
Mhm.
just looking at your journey and how you've now used that in your book. Can you explain a little bit more about the principles of the Course in Miracle, how it works? Because I think there's a lot of people, including myself, who are not as familiar with it.
Yeah, so basically, I mean, unpacking the course is ridiculous. Like, look at this book; it's insane.
Big.
This is the course. So, I'm not going to be able to do a very good job of that in like
It's okay.
the time that we have. But here's what I will say. As somebody who has spent a tremendous amount of time focused on careers and dissecting where what bothers us about our careers and where we have our pain points. And a lot of what I've seen and a lot of what I've experienced personally is we get in trouble when we start to associate our career with our self-worth and our identity. And how often do we get stuck in that trap? And we rely on our job titles and our professional career to fill in that gap for us and to make us feel whole. And what the course taught me, and what it has taught millions of students around the world, is that you're whole already. And all that you have to do is to see that wholeness. And all that you have to do to see that wholeness is to get rid of what the course calls ego-based thinking that blocks it. So the only thing that's real is that love, that capital L love, that completion. And anything else that you think about yourself, viewing yourself as insecure, incomplete, is your perception. And your perception goes up and down and up and down and up and down, usually dependent upon whether or not you've attained a goal. And what we need to do is to unwind that and get back to the fact that we don't need to achieve the goal to feel complete, that we're complete already. And that's the lesson one of the biggest lessons that I've learned from the course.
Yeah, I love that. That's very important. I love that you've taken the whole book and put it into very career focused, like tips and advice too, because it's overwhelming, right? Just that whole book and the course that you're talking about. But when you break it down like you have and in your book, that couldn't have been easy to take that whole book and to translate it into careers.
Yeah, well, I had been so steeped in careers for my whole
Right.
career. My career was careers, as is yours. And so once I became a course student, it became fairly natural to blend all of these things because I noticed that my career changed as I started applying the principles. So once that started happening, I was like, how do I share this?
So tell us where people can find your book and what's next for you. What are you doing to celebrate this book launch?
Okay, so people can find me at my website, emilybennington.com, and I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And what's next for me is I'm sensing that because the course is such a heady book and people are pretty unfamiliar with it, and even those who call themselves students, as I still am, but even those of us I'll throw myself in this category, even those who call ourselves students still have so much to learn about what the course is. And so I'm planning to write a study guide on the course and to take people through it sequentially and just make it into small digestible pieces that are easier to get through than the book is now.
Very cool. Awesome. So what are your last words from your book, from the Course in Miracles, like kind of summarizing everything we've talked about?
Well, just knowing that there's a line in the course that says perfection is not a matter of degree. And I think if we all just knew that, like if we all knew that we were spiritually perfect, and if we were able to really see ourselves this way, then we wouldn't have so much conflict, because we would know that bodies can do battle with each other and personalities can do battle with each other and perceptions can come at each other, but the spiritual level where we all really are is perfect. And so what are we fighting about, right? At the end of the day, what are we really fighting about? And I just wish that we knew this, because A, it would solve a lot of our conflict situations, and B, it would solve a lot of our confidence issues.
Yeah.
Because when we know that we have nothing to strive for, that our spiritual perfection, our holiness, our wholeness with a W is not a dial that goes up or down based on what we do or don't do or what we think or don't think. It is just perfect. Then we wouldn't suffer so much with so much of the craziness that goes on in our head. And so I just wish that everyone could have that, could have the perspective that you get from a serious spiritual path.
When you say that too, I think of all in the corporate world too, there's so many things you're rated on so to make you look not whole and perfect, right? Like you need to work on this and this and this, and it gets you down, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I love that you're talking about how you're perfect, you're whole. And it's a perfect way to end this interview. So thank you.
You're more than a metric.
Yeah, you are. You totally are. Like quote, Emily Bennington, you are more than a metric. Awesome. Thank you for being here, Emily, and congrats on your book launch.
Thank you so much.